All right, everybody, welcome to the show. Hello.
Welcome back.
This is an interesting day because we are bringing you an encore episode from March 2022. And I remember when this episode originally aired, and it was just like a massive spike in downloads.
Yeah.
Which sometimes we can kind of predict, and other times it'll take us by surprise what the listening community is really, really interested in. And you let us know by your clicks that this conversation was fascinating to you and interesting to you and important to you, because we're bringing it back, particularly during Pride Month. It has such a cozy home right here in June. But this is a conversation that I had with my friend Jonathan Merritt. So this was a really beautiful and transformational episode, not just for you, but for me. And I honestly think for him too. This was still kind of on the front edge of his truly outward facing honesty,
Yes.
right? About his life, which has even flourished and deepened in the 3 years since, right?
Right. But you can hear in the interview, like some of these things are still so tender, a little scary. Like he hadn't been as open with many people publicly as he was with you in this interview.
Yeah, I think that's right. Exactly right. And I mean, we'll save most of it for the interview, but just for a snapshot, if you're like, give me a little bit of details here. Jonathan's dad was and has been and is like a big time pastor inside the Southern Baptist Convention.
President of the SBC at one point.
Yeah, that's right. And so in summation, this conversation is really about Jonathan's experience growing up in a powerful SBC home, gay, and in the closet. And I mean, people in the community can understand the dilemma when you feel, at least, like you are faced with literally living true and having any shot at a genuine, like fulfilling, honest life, or staying in good relationship with your family.
And your entire faith.
Your whole, which that's where his career was too.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just his family, it was his work, his community. He was a reporter for Religion News Service, and that's a kind of a good segue into my personal connection with Jonathan. Jonathan was the journalist who interviewed me on RNS in late October 2016. So it was, I think, 2 weeks before the election. Mm-hmm. I was already in very hot water with my online community, which at the time was still almost entirely evangelical. Mm-hmm. Like that was still my world. That's still where I was writing and leading and speaking and whatever.
I thought at the time your comment section couldn't get worse.
That's right.
I thought.
Because I had been that whole entire year and the year before, frankly, kind of openly shocked and critical, not just at Donald Trump and that campaign, and what I was stunned to discover was the Evangelical partnership with his campaign, but also I had spent a couple of real firm years as a learner in anti-racism. And so neither one of those were going well for me.
No, not at all. You poked the bear over and over and over. And we're paying the price.
Yeah.
We thought,
for sure. And I had been, for anybody paying attention, which you were, because you just reminded me of something before we started, I'm going to have you mention, but you were paying attention. I was had been deeply grappling with theology around the LGBTQ community.
Yeah.
Deeply. And had already changed my mind. I had changed my mind that year. So earlier that year, and at the time I was married and Brandon and I were kind of in joint partnership here, we said, okay, all right, let's spend a handful of months kind of unhooking ourselves from the machine as much as we can so that when this bomb drops and the shrapnel goes everywhere, it'll affect the least amount of people.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so I had canceled, or I had not taken on any new speaking events. So my whole next year was empty. And that was at the time when that was my primary work.
Yeah.
So I had not taken any new speaking events because I knew every single one of them would have to fire me.
Yeah.
And that would create such chaos for all these churches and all these whatever. Oh boy. Anyway, we had planned on making that announcement in a much more deliberate, intentional way where we were in charge of the narrative, right? So we were going to come out and say, we have something to talk about. We have been in deep examination and we have discovered that we have changed our mind on this theology, and then sort of prepare. Instead, Jonathan interviewed me at RNS, and the topic of the interview was supposed to be covering the Belong tour that I was on. That was the whole point. Like, the whole point was, how's the tour going and where are you going next and what are you guys talking about? So, and I did interviews all the time. So that I did not have any red flags going up. Like, ooh, be careful. Also, I didn't know that Jonathan was gay and I didn't know that he was in the closet.
Right.
And so, and we talk about this and have talked about this for a decade now, but he used that interview to kind of rapid fire walk me through conservative talking points instead. What do you think about abortion? Are you going to vote for Hillary? What is your deal with white supremacy? And I was just fail. I was failing I wasn't ready for it. And so I just told the truth.
You told the truth.
Yeah.
You were ready for it. You had actually been doing the work for a decade.
You're right.
To be ready to answer those questions honestly.
You're right.
You weren't, your PR wasn't ready.
That's exactly, you're telling the most truth. I was ready, and I had been talking about every other thing in the interview, except for I'm sorry, let me just cough real quick. I was ready for everything except the last question was, do you believe that LGBTQ relationships can be holy? And I just remember sitting there thinking, well, here we are.
Yep.
And I just said, yes, I do. And I would go to a gay wedding and I would drink champagne because, leave it to me to be extra.
Right. I mean, you told the truth and you doubled down.
And then I doubled down. And that interview ended maybe 10 or 15 minutes later. And I remember just sitting on my couch, just thinking, I just blew up my career. I knew I was going to, but I've done it. And I texted Jonathan at 3 a.m. And I said, I wasn't ready for you to ask me all that. And he was like, I'm a journalist. Like,
yeah,
this is my scoop, essentially. I said, I understand that. Would you give me one day? Will you send me back that final question and let me write out my answer? Because I thought, if this is it, let me make it thoughtful.
Yeah.
Let me make it thoughtful. Let me be as careful with this as I wanted to be. And he said, okay. So in the middle of the night, I wrote out my response that he then substituted for whatever shorter, quicker thing that I said in the actual interview.
And to be clear, y'all were friends.
Yeah.
He's an excellent journalist.
Yeah.
Like, you weren't prepared for those questions, but this wasn't a subversive gotcha interview. He did not mean malice.
Yeah.
It strengthened your relationship.
Yeah. Eventually.
Eventually.
I would not say it did at the beginning.
But yeah, it was a big deal. And I don't think I knew you even did the interview, but we were at lunch the day that it dropped.
Oh boy.
We were eating outside, so it must have been nice weather in October. And you did something you never do. You checked your phone a couple of times. I think you were waiting for it to drop.
Oh, boy.
And I was like, what's going on? And you told me, and I was like, basically, you said this article's going to drop. And I said that I was affirming, and our church is affirming, and I believe gay marriage can be holy. And I was like, oh, well, about time.
Yeah. You'd been there.
You and I had been talking about this at the time for years and years and
That's
years.
right.
I had asked constantly, when is our church going to be affirming?
Yeah.
Like, I will stay because it's good people and I know you're doing the work, but like, what is taking so long?
Yeah.
So I was so flippant about it and dismissive. And you were like, no, it's bad. It's going to be bad. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what? F those guys.
Yeah.
Like, who needs them? Good riddance.
Totally.
Your comment section is finally going to be decent.
You were not wrong, by the way.
Right. But I also was not compassionate at all. Like, then it probably took a month for me to realize, oh, we were sitting at that table having a nice lunch outside, and there was a flash flood coming towards you, like a wall of water filled with debris. And you knew it was coming. And I was like, just put a life jacket on. You know? And sure enough, like, your books were pulled off shelves.
Out of print.
The next day, out of print. There's probably some book burnings.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah. It was scorched earth.
It really was. For months.
It really, really was. It's so funny because you were just reminding me that we were at lunch, and I told you before we started recording, I'm like, I don't even remember.
Yeah.
I think I was so disassociated. Because also that is we're not built to handle that level of outrage. And when I tell you, I mean, I could never count how many articles were written about me that year from that moment on.
Yeah.
I couldn't even count. And I remember, here's such like a teeny little example of how far it went. I remember Becky Mooring, who had moved, our good friend, moved. She's in Alabama.
Yeah.
Maybe 3 weeks later, texting me going, Jen, you are the subject of our sermon.
Oh my God.
At our church.
No.
At Taylor Pruitt, Jenny's daughter, was in college, and they're huge at A&M. I don't know if you have that they have this massive college ministry called Breakaway. Do you know about this?
Yeah.
It's thousands and thousands of kids. And I was the subject of Breakaway. And it was just everywhere.
You were a perfect target.
Yeah.
Perfect. Like,
Yeah.
To hold up and say, see, this is what happens when you let women
That's right.
speak.
That's exactly right.
This is what happens when you let them off the leash and then they form their own ideas.
Yeah.
Destruction.
That's exactly what happened.
You better keep your women in check.
Yeah. That's exactly what happened. And not even just from men, but also from women. There was a huge article written about me called essentially Who's in Charge of These Women's Theology. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember that
I
too.
read that.
It was written by a female journalist. And it was just a bleak time. And I just thought, well, okay. I was so relieved to have finally said what I believed to be true, and to not have still been simmering in the coward's shallow pool, that I honestly, even though I was losing, and I didn't know if I was going to rebuild yet, it was too soon for that. So it was just loss. I still was like, I prefer it. So if this is just the end of my work, then I went out swinging.
You did.
I went out swinging.
And it really was the end, and it lasted for months.
Yeah.
So that was right before the election.
Yeah.
And you finally wrote about it, like got your head above water, maybe like Easter the next year.
It's so weird that your memory is so good. On Easter, I finally wrote a Good Friday post. And it was the first time, because I had just sort of glossed. I had just glossed. So from November to Easter, I had just carried on in a very neutral way.
Mm-hmm.
But meanwhile, we were just suffering. And so finally on Easter, I wrote the whole thing I think I called it the saddest Good Friday in memory, because I'm very dramatic. I'm very dramatic. And to be honest with you, that was the beginning of healing for me.
Oh.
To have finally said, this has been so painful, and I've lost so many friends and spaces and work, and everybody was so mean to us. And this has been so hard, and I don't know if it'll ever, I'm in the tomb. And that was the tip.
And
Back
then
up.
from this vantage point now, during Pride Month, to think back at how strong the indoctrination had to be.
Can you imagine?
For you to wrestle for a decade about this subject that now feels like the truest thing ever. It's so obvious.
It's so real.
How bad is the brainwashing?
That's right. That's a great point. I
That
mean,
you have to struggle so hard to make it make sense.
To reverse all that messaging.
Yeah. And almost lose your whole career over it.
It seems crazy, right?
It is crazy.
Yeah, it is. It is crazy. And 10 years later, too, I can just be like, thank goodness Jonathan asked me that question.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to get there. Well, I was probably going to get there in the next month. So he did not hasten something that was years away. Rip that Band-Aid off. Free fell. And then when I think about how my life in the 10 years since deeply connected to just the queer community in general,
mm-hmm.
How full my life is, how beautiful, how much more colorful, how much more free. It's the best thing that ever happened to me, probably.
Yeah. I loved going back and listening to this. I listened to it when it first came out, and then I watched it yesterday.
Yeah.
It's such a good interview.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting hearing y'all talk about some of the political stuff, because we had no idea.
Oh my gosh.
Again, with the metaphor of the flash flood full of debris coming at us. But you did make a prediction and said, I think the evangelical church is going to double down.
I hate that I was right about that.
You were right, and also underestimated it by 1,000,000.
You're right.
But it was a good conversation to listen to again.
Well, with that long intro, it is a good conversation. And let me say this about my friend Jonathan before we bring him back on here. It has been wonderful to watch him flourish. Both before this original conversation and certainly since. Just to see him use his gifts in the fullness of who he is and rise, really. Not just survive. He didn't just keep his head above water. He's just rising and succeeding and excelling. And it just reminds me yet again, the best way to live is true. Mm-hmm. No matter what you think it will or what it will cost you. Either way, the cost is worth the reward.
And also the work to maintain the relationships that matter is worth the reward, because he still has a healthy relationship with his family.
That's so true.
And his faith is deeper than it's ever been.
Yep, exactly.
So
he didn't have to pick after all.
The cost of the things that don't work for you, absolutely worth it.
Absolutely worth it. And I think you're going to love this conversation. If you heard it the first time, it's going to feel fresh to you in today's context. And if you haven't, you're going to see why so many people downloaded this episode originally. So here is our encore presentation of Growing Up Evangelical and Gay with my good friend, the brilliant and the brave Jonathan Merritt. Well, I'm so happy to see you. And You look fantastic. Thanks for being on the show today. You know, I just so appreciate your time, and I so appreciate your candor and, you know, your kind of constant willingness to kind of be out on the razor's edge of everything.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I started my career really picking fights. And if you ask my mother, she'll say that was something that always came naturally to me.
On brand.
I do a little less these days than I used to because I've grown up a little bit more. But I appreciate you saying that, because I think some of the fights that I've picked have been righteous fights, and those are different.
Those are. You know, I pick them too.
Yeah.
So
I know.
Yeah, I pick my battles, and when I pick them hard.
Right.
So, okay, listen, I've told my listeners a little bit about you already as sort of your credentials and high leveled for them, who you are. But would you mind quickly, before we sort of start talking about everything we're going to talk about, for anybody who's new to you, can you tell us a little bit about you and where you are, what your basic deal is, and sort of what your work kind of looks like in general?
Okay. Yeah. So for, I don't know, the last 15 or so years, I've basically been a writer who sits at the intersection of faith and culture. And so columnist, author, ghost written a ton. But I think in particularly in the pandemic, my work has shifted a bit away from some of that public facing work to, I had a woman, and I don't know if this is weird for anyone, who gave me a word right before the pandemic. And she said, you know, I think you're called not just to be a writer, but to be a midwife of ideas.
Wow.
And so when she said that, you know, it was like tuning a guitar string. It really was just like, wow, this resonates with my spirit. And so I began to do other kinds of work, developing creative projects in this space as, you know, a literary agent, as kind of now moving into some projects in the entertainment space, which is not a place that I expected to be. So these things are taking shape, and I still do write. But I also get to help other projects live that I could never write, that I'm not qualified to write, life experiences that I haven't had, but they are ideas that deserve to exist in public. And so that's been a shift for me, but I'm also working on another book. So I'm doing both, but I think the knobs, I've turned the knobs on those a little bit, if that makes sense.
I love that. I think that must be really energizing for you. You're already, you know, you're obviously a creative and a creator, but it's a different gear to help someone else create. And it's fulfilling in its own way, but completely different muscle to exercise. I love that you're doing that. I think there's so much ahead of both of us as creators, and what that could look like could take all kinds of forms. Can you just sort of also, because we were just talking about it before we started recording, just talk a little bit about your very dreamy living life, your living space, where you live, what it's like? You know, my envy is all the way to my bones, to my bone marrow. Yes.
Well, I'll tell you, I know on your podcast, one of the things that you ask your guests is that famous Barbara Brown Taylor question.
Yeah, that's right. You're going to get it.
And it's the answer for me to that question. What is saving my life is my chosen family. Yeah. You know, I live in New York City. I live in Manhattan, and it's not always a place where you find the kind of home or family or community in the way that other people use those words, because this is a transient city, and your friend group will turn over every 3 or 4 years. And that's just the way it is. And so I think that the heart and the mind then sort of naturally protects, and you begin to form shallow relationships.
Yeah.
And that's not what I have here. I live on the campus of the General Theological Seminary of the Episcopal Church. It's been around for hundreds of years here in Chelsea. In fact, the building next to me was where 'Twas the Night Before Christmas was pinned in front of a fireplace. And I live in a beautiful building that was built in 1904 on this lawn. And I'm surrounded by people who I've known for years and years.
Yeah.
And I am an uncle to their children. And we celebrate holidays together, and we watch football games, and we do book clubs, and we ask hard questions, and we cry a lot. We get to cry a lot with each other and grieve and celebrate. And, I'm not partnered. I don't have children. I live very far away from my biological nephews and nieces. And so this is a gift. I mean, I said this to a mutual friend of ours who was visiting a week or two ago. I said, I am very aware that I am living some of the best days of my life right here, right now with these people.
Oh, I love this so much. And I mean, I can absolutely bear witness that you are not exaggerating. The place that you live is magical and charming. And when I'm out in that courtyard, I just think this is it. Like, this is gorgeous. And of course, you, and I know your community, a lot of my friends are, of course, we have the same friends. And I love this for you. Like, I absolutely love it for you. I don't know what the lifespan is of getting to live at a seminary, but while you are there, may every Friday night be like pizza night, and bring what you have and dips, and let's sit on a blanket and let the kids run around. It's absolute magic. Okay. All right. So you, like me, and like a lot of my listening community, we grew up in a pretty conservative religious environment. This is, of course, something you and I have talked about ad nauseum, but we both deeply understand. And as you've said, you identify as part of the LGBTQ community. And so can you both remember and talk about, or if there was like a point in your life where you realize, and maybe this was a slow burn, I'd like to hear you talk about it, but when what you wanted for your own life, like who you are and how you are, was not available to you in your faith space, in the environment that you were in. And so I want to hear that, how that felt internally. I'm just going to assume it was so lonely and probably terrifying, but I'm not going to put words in your mouth. And then I'd like to hear after that, how you managed to stay all this time, like to this day, deeply connected, like to your faith. Even though it was such a lonely and an inhospitable place for you during some of your most formative years.
Mm-hmm. So you asked a really good question. I mean, just a really great question about a point in my life when I realized, I think your phrase was, that what I wanted for my life wasn't available to me. And if you've grown up gay and evangelical, that is your origin story.
That's right.
And I grew up in the home of a megachurch pastor who had a PhD in New Testament, who was the president of the Southern Baptist Convention. He was is a TBN televangelist, and described himself gleefully being to the right of Ronald Reagan. And I grew up...
Jonathan, I hadn't heard that. Oh, gosh.
I grew up reading Ann Coulter books and, defending 7-day literal creationism, and believing that people who were attracted to people of their same gender were disordered and abominations, and that meant me. And when you hear these sort of disgusting things, that ignorant things that are said by evangelicals about gay, lesbian, transgender people, non-binary people, anyone that doesn't fit into that box,
right?
Anybody can realize that is painful for someone like me. It's another thing when it is out of the mouth of the people that you want with your whole heart to love you and accept you. And so that was, for me, I lived so wanting to be loved and accepted by my parents and my community, because who doesn't want belonging?
Of course.
And so that meant that I had to choose. I had a choice. I could either leave the idea of being loved in that way and loving in that way behind, and to get belonging and acceptance, or I could choose to be rejected by the people that I was given as a family and a faith community, and I could sort of go off on my own way and try to find love. And that's a tough decision.
Oh gosh. Is it ever?
So for the first 29 years of my life, that's how I lived.
Yeah.
And then a week or two before my 30th birthday, the capital U universe pushed me off the cliff. And that's when I was outed in a very public way.
Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah. I had written an article in USA Today, a column, and it was called An Evangelical's Plea, Love the Sinner.
Yeah.
Which is a prescient article now looking back, because what I was really saying was love me.
Of course.
And I was arguing in there that, I had grown up hearing this, we hate the sin, we love the sinner. And yet everywhere I looked was all this sin hate. And there was not a lot of, there was no markings of loving these people who they believed were, I should qualify that, believed were sinners, so to speak. And a gay blogger reached out to me after that, who said he appreciated this article. We formed a friendship. I began to give this person my trust. I began to share things with this person that I had never shared before. And on one occasion, I was actually speaking at the Q conference in Chicago. The person lived in Indiana and said, "I'd love to come down and meet you." And I said, "Great." We had dinner, we had drinks, too many of them. We made out. We didn't have sex. This person didn't stay in my hotel room. And when I came home, I was completely disoriented. So this for me was like a real life-shattering event. And so when I came home, this person was wanted to be in a relationship with me.
Right.
And I was not ready for that. I couldn't get my head around what had just happened. And so I had to sever that relationship. 3 years later, I wrote another article for The Atlantic in the midst of the Chick-fil-A uproar. That was called In Defense of Eating Chick-fil-A, that went viral at the time. And as I said in that article, it had nothing to do with gay marriage. It was an argument about intertwining our politics and our consumerism in a capitalistic culture and why that's unsustainable. I still believe this. I believe this today as progressive as I am. But that person then decided to share publicly what had happened because he interpreted that article to be anti-gay.
I see.
And so I then entered into, for me, change happens. It's both a rupture and it's a process. And so that was a rupture. And at that point, then I wasn't even sure who I was or what I was. So it sent me on a journey that was multi-years after that, where this am I gay thing was just what a psychologist would call a presenting problem. But when you peeled back there were all of these unhealed, sutured wounds that had to be attended to. And they had festered for a long, long time. Totally. And so that for me was the single event in my life. It is BC and AD. That event was like a hammer that shattered my life into two pieces. And I both grieve it and would never wish it on anyone. And in another way, I'm so grateful for that.
I understand this.
It really made me do some things. It forced some things that should have happened earlier, and thank God didn't happen later. And so it's a messy, terrible, wonderful thing that I went through.
I understand that so much. I can imagine when all those top layers get peeled back, I'm guessing what was underneath there, having really been buried for you, had a lot to do with your family. Can you talk about what that was like? Because this is a big deal when another person puts your, like, the tenderest part of not just your story, but like your identity out in a public place. And you've got parents and you have aunts and uncles, and like it's so intrusive into the privacy of your actual lived life. And I'm wondering if that's where you had to kind of ultimately start once you manage the sort of social chaos of being thrust into the spotlight like that.
Yeah. Yes. And as you know, in these situations, there's also professional implications. Suddenly
Absolutely.
I wasn't sure that I'd be able to pay rent.
Yep.
And that is a hell of an experience. I mean, people who have
I mean, you were writing for RNS. So yeah.
So I would say with my parents, that for me, people have said like, well, why in the last 10 years did you not talk a lot about this in public? And the reason is because I was just having to first talk about it so much in private, and to really try to triage this by dealing with family and friends first. And unfortunately, in my case, for many years, I was up against denial.
Yeah.
A real lack of acceptance.
Yeah.
On the part of my family and friends.
Uh-huh.
And it took years to have conversations that, other people probably have with their friends and family in a matter of days. And and there was also a changing conception of who I was. So every time we talked, it's like, I thought you said this, and now you're saying this, and now you're saying this. And so it was messy for all of us. But I think for me, it really centered on working through first with my mom, who had all these dreams for her boy that had to die and be grieved. And for my dad, who has all of these beliefs about what is good and not good, and how those things play into whether or not I will be present in his conception of the afterlife.
Yeah.
And that's a scrambled egg. And it's hard to pull all of that apart. So I understand that many people in my own community who felt frustrated in that time that I wasn't inviting them in a more public way into that process. But it was a full-time job to manage it on the back end, and it was all I could do.
When more or less, when did that break? And so how far back was this? I want to put it in the timeline here.
So in 2012, I started seeing a therapist pretty intensively. And they were really opening me up and helping me clean out some of the mess, which, that went on for a good year. And then I made the move from Atlanta, where I was living as a teaching pastor, essentially under my dad at a Southern Baptist church, making the move then to New York City. Again, continuing this counseling journey, therapy, self-exploration, dating. And that went on for probably another 5 years. And it wasn't really, I'd say, until late last year that the dam broke. And I finally had to have some real conversations with some people who are very close to me to say, it is clear now that you do not know me very well, and I would like you to do that. And so in order to do that, these are the things that we will need to do. And I was gifted with parents who in that moment were willing to step into that, and with siblings who were willing to step into that. And through that, we've developed probably a kind of relationship that is boundaried and also healthy. That I didn't think was possible.
I love to hear that. I've watched the way that you have spoken both to and about your dad, particularly. He's run up the SBC flagpole all the way to the tip top. And the way that you have interacted with him and spoken even of him publicly has always been wildly generous so respectful, connected as you could probably be at the time. And I always really admired that. And I remember watching you sort of do this public lift, which is so complex. I mean, there's so much in that soup pot that you are trying to figure out. I just remember thinking, Jonathan is going to be proud later of the way he did this, of the way that he spoke to and about his family, his parents, of what you shared and didn't share publicly, at the pace in which you pulled back the curtain on your own life and you gave your private life a chance to be private, because there is a difference between privacy and secrecy. And we are allowed privacy. That is our right. And just knowing, I was assuming this for you will continue to roll out. You will continue to develop into your own identity. You will continue to like grow into your own confidence and faith and sexuality and ultimately probably relationships. Like that's going to keep happening because it just happens to all of us. But in the sort of murky beginning-ish, middle-ish, while that was still in flux, I'm proud of the way that you didn't burn all the ships, that you kept possibility open for repair and for reconnection. And like even last year, being able to say, we got to go 10 layers deeper than we are right now. I need more.
Yeah.
And I think because of the way that you've treated your family and your friends who were in conflict all this time, that was possible. That was really possible. I hope that you feel proud of yourself when you look back on this last decade.
Yeah, I do feel proud, but I also appreciate you saying that, because, you know, the one thing that you can never do is observe your life from the outside. And this has also been a decade with so many mistakes, and people who were hurt along the way. And I also grieve that. So I am in that tension of grief and celebration for the last year.
Yeah.
And I also realize that if it took me 29 years to even begin this conversation, that it's okay if it takes some other people a little bit of time too. And I give them that grace, but I will say it is an ongoing process. And there are some days where it is really, really hard.
Yeah.
But we fight with each other and for each other.
Yeah.
And that's how we do family.
Yeah.
But you know, there you can find any armchair expert online that will tell you to cut your family off and all of this. And of course, now with a lot of the thinking that's being done around, you know, internal family systems theory, the idea is that like when you cut off those primary relationships, you've integrated parts of those people into yourself. And those parts need to be healed, but you cannot heal within unless you do the work of healing between. And so if it's possible to do that hard, holy work, then you should do it if you can. Not everybody can. And I have up to this point been able to do that. And what I have seen is it's not only healed that liminal space between me and my dad and me and my mom and me and some of these friends, but all of those parts inside of me that I've inherited from them, they've also been able to be put back together and to be healed. And so, you know, it's not just about the relationship with someone else. It's about my internal world and the pieces there that need to be put back together.
That's pretty profound. I've got a good friend working through that sort of approach to like relational mental health. Will you just name it one more time for people who are like, what did he say?
Yeah. Oh, like in internal family systems theory. Yeah. So the idea is like, there's a piece of your mom. Everybody will see this. Oh, I'm just like my mom in that way. That, you know, you can realize you've integrated parts of their personalities, their frameworks, their assumptions. And that's just what happens to children. And so it's not like drawing a boundary with a neighbor, you know, because you haven't integrated your neighbor into yourself. But in your immediate family, there are all these pieces. So when you cut off those immediate family members, and sometimes it's necessary, unfortunately,
Yeah.
You cut off the possibility of certain kinds of healing that you desperately need. You actually believe you're protecting yourself. And there's a positive feedback loop because you do get temporary relief. But what you don't get is the ultimate healing. You cut yourself off from the thing you actually need. And I have been able to keep that door open. There have been months where we haven't been able to speak in the past, and we just had to have boundaries like that. We're not in that place now, and I'm really grateful for that. But it's this internal family systems thinking that it's new and it's emerging, and things are being written about it now. But if people are, I think I've got a book called like No Bad Parts, and maybe it's Richard Schwartz, I think, but it's a great book. That inside you there are all these things, and they're not bad parts; they're reflections of the brokenness that you've inherited.
I alluded to this in my introduction, but you and I have been down parallel paths in the evolution of our faith, really even tightly wound together, frankly. And, obviously there's you coming into your own as identifying as a gay man of faith. And then there was me in the same zip code, reckoning with my views, my theology, my doctrine. This was all as like gay marriage is becoming legal. And of course, my own daughter, Sydney's identification in the LGBTQ community. And there was a very intense examination of my heart, my ideology, my thoughts toward the whole thing, because I come to this crossroads for me where my head and my heart were at such odds around this, which is kind of rare for me, to be honest with you. Like generally, these guys are in lockstep when it comes to matters of faith. Most faith things for me make sense. They make sense because they bear out truthfully. I get the concept of forgiveness. I watch it bear out. Like I get the concept of being a good neighbor. I watch it bear out. But the concept of the LGBTQ community being malformed or nothing made sense. I could not get this to reconcile because all I saw on the other side of that doctrine, of course, was death, destruction, heartache, suffering, self-harm, the suicide rates. I mean, we all know this. And so it wasn't matching. It wasn't matching. The thing wasn't doing the thing it said it was going to do. And so you know that, and you had watched me sort of grapple with this publicly in a certain way, in a way that was circling the drain, but still holding some doors open, right? Just for conversation to keep going. So in a blaze of glory, I laid down my change of mind and my change of heart and my change of theology in an interview with you. Now, most of my community will remember this article. They may not know that you were the guy, that you were the one on the other end of the phone. And as we both know, it was wild. It was one of the wildest seasons of my life. I don't even know if we were saying the word cancel culture that year. This was in 2016. And in a just an absolute move of bananas timing. It was a week before the election. I mean, I was just going down in flames everywhere. I'd been so vocally anti-Trump. I lost a huge portion of my community overnight. And as you mentioned earlier, an enormous professional effect as well, that there was just a whole part of my work that was over. It wasn't up for debate. It wasn't up for let's sit down and talk about this. It was just over. My books were pulled off shelves. One of them was put out of print. And I got called a heretic by every person that lived on earth. And so it was such a disruptive time. And it was scary. I don't think we're built for that level of attention, period, be it good or bad. And then just that level of just vitriol. And, but it's like you said earlier, like, I wish that on no one, absolutely no one, to stand at the center of that storm and not let it kill you. But I am not sorry it happened. Like, there was no more circling the drain. It was it. That did it. That pushed me publicly into where I already was, obviously. I mean, I told you the bald truth about how I felt about not just gay marriage, but how I felt about gay people, that I think they're beloved by God and there's nothing wrong with them. And they deserve love and happiness and marriage and all toast champagne at their weddings, I believe is what I told you. You know what, me, I'm going to go in. If you're going to ask me, I'm going to be extra about it. And so I want to talk to you about your memory of that time, particularly with you and I, and because you were in an interesting space. You're a journalist, primarily writing through some of the just more controversial elements of faith and doctrine, that being a key one. And then you're in a unique position to begin to, genuinely, like through your work, begin to sort of build a community of voices from the faith community to say, there's another way. We don't subscribe to this thing that's just kind of the leading ideology. This is not okay. What we're doing, how we are going to re-examine this doctrine through a variety of different lenses. And you sort of started building this space. So can you talk about what that was like for you and what you were hoping to accomplish, and kind of, I know how that went for me. I'm curious how it went for you.
Well,
that was a very long, I don't even know if that was a question.
Yeah,
that was a monologue.
I know exactly what you're asking. And I think this is fascinating because we've never had this conversation, actually, having been friends. Yeah. You know, I think that during that period, because I felt like I was having to do so much private work around this, maybe this was my way of doing some public work, or maybe that's how I thought about it. You know, I was really impacted years ago by an article in which Ed Stetzer was quoted, and he said, you know, you can take all the evangelicals who are pro-gay and fit them in a minivan.
I remember this. Mm-hmm.
And that didn't sound right to me. And I was having conversations with people off the record who were telling me very different things. Mm-hmm. And so what I decided was, because I was doing interviews with interesting people who were Christians, that I would just start asking people. And so, you know, I broke the Trey Pearson story, and I wrote the story with you, and I broke the story about Eugene Peterson's change of heart, and David Gushee, and these stories. And I will say I feel conflicted looking back on those, because there's a sense in which, look, a question is in an interview, it's fair game, and somebody can choose to answer or not answer those questions. And also, it was a way for me to use other people to have conversations that I was not a part of. I was not allowing myself to be a part of. And I think in the case of the article that I did with you, which was about politics, and Eugene Peterson, which was around, you know, his life, I was shocked at I knew in those moments, I was like, okay, this is going to get clicks. People are going to read this. This is going to be interesting to a lot of people. But I did not expect that order of magnitude. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I was kind of dragged into it, but nobody was canceling me. You know, evangelicals complain about cancel culture as one of the most weird, ironic. I mean, they have honed that skill over so many decades. And now they're whining about it when the same mechanisms that they have perpetrated and perfected are now turned back on them. So, you know, don't cry to me about that. But I'll say I was shocked, and I lost sleep over it too, because I thought, did I just screw up? her life? Did I just ruin this person's life? And so for me, it was a time, I think, of really looking inward and thinking about whether what I was doing was in service to the truth or in service to myself. And I don't know, maybe a mix of both.
Well, you know what? We're 6 years out from that article that came, 2016, and I can just tell you, I mean, again, like my metric is always, let's look to the fruit of a thing. Let's see what the fruit tells us. It's pretty trustworthy. The fruit's good or it's bad, and it'll bear out. And even though there was a short game there was a short-term catastrophic effect to me personally, just as a leader, as a writer, as a person in evangelical culture at the time, which of course I'm not now, but the long effects of that moment are categorically good. Like I really couldn't even quantify it, frankly. Right. Like, sort of being forced into standing in my own convictions. And so I had the moment there at the beginning, I'm like, I could walk this back a little. I know how to do that. Like, we know the rules of the community. We know the words to say. We know how you can be contrite in a certain way with a certain script and find your way kind of back into the thing on probation. Do you know what I mean? I know that. I've seen people do that. And so I remember that temptation just because it was so wild. I was like you, I expected it, of course, but I didn't expect what happened. But I just thought, no, I'm going to stand in it. I'm going to stand in the storm until it passes, and then I'm free. And I was. And then I was free to be an absolute, like, transparent, all the way, 100% ally. And the amount of, it's bottomless how many LGBTQ people, moms and dads of gay kids, sisters, brothers, pastors, there's no end to how much they have reached out and just said, this set us free to reexamine. Yeah. We needed somebody from the inside to change her mind. Like, it's one thing I used to tell Rachel, Held Evans, to everybody listening. I used to tell Rachel, why aren't they mean to you? Like, why do you get a free pass? Why do you get to be affirming in your theology and you just still get to, like, live your life? She's like, because the evangelical subculture has room for you if that's how they meet you. They meet you in a certain place. You're progressive. This is your theology and your ideology. They do not have room if you change your mind. Yeah. Changing your mind is a different category.
That's right.
And so I feel like I changed my mind in public. I think it has had an incredible positive effect, and I don't regret it at all. So you shouldn't either. Let's regret things that require regretting. Okay, we've got plenty of that too. Yeah. We've been garbage people. Like, let's not regret things that shouldn't be regretted.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You used your space too in a way that meant a lot to people. Like, whose backs do we have, right? Are we trying to keep the power players happy and in charge? Or are we siding with people who have been marginalized and wounded and have suffered at the hand? That's where we go. Where we go. This is not ambiguous. Right. So there's my 2 cents on it. Let me ask you this, because you have really been in the deal. Like, you have been in it. Like, as a journalist, you have reported on it. You've got your finger on the pulse of trends and what's changing and what's shifting, and you're always paying attention. I'd like to know what you think right now about our faith in this culture. Do you feel hopeful? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? And not just around the LGBTQ community and their full and rightful place inside the church, obviously, but all of it. The Trump era, the continued marriage of the evangelical culture to a political party. Do you see it shifting? Do you see it changing? Do you see it? I just don't know. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Well, I wrote a book in 2012 about the evangelical political situation. It was called A Faith of Our Own, Following Jesus Beyond the Culture Wars. And I essentially said, this is where this is heading. And nobody at the time, everybody's like, no, it's not. Like, this is principled. It's not about power. It's about character of our leaders and morals. And so nobody bought it, which is, is what it is.
The end. Yeah.
And
that's
so
the story of
like,
publishing.
Exactly. So then people will be like, over these last few years, like, are you surprised at what you've seen with Donald Trump? And the answer is, I think it's the logical end of decisions that were made in the 1970s, essentially, in reaction to the cultural revolutions that were happening, and the rise of feminism, the rise of the gay rights movement, the Stonewall riots, triggered that, the separation of church and state in public schools, legalization of birth control and abortion, and the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And white folks didn't like that. White Christian folks, particularly in the South, didn't like that so much.
Yeah.
And so they decided they would become a political force. And it's been very effective.
Yeah.
But it is always, politics for evangelicals have always been a means to an end. And the end is dominance and control. And so I think there is an unmasking that is happening. And I think that, evangelicals had in the 90s, there was this storyline that all the liberal mainlines were declining because they were liberal, and liberalism ends in death.
Right.
Now we have demographers, and we go, oh no, it was just because of birth rates. You guys were just having lots of babies. And now your birth rates have also slowed down, and you've turned out to be really nasty bigots. And so your churches are also dying. And so if you look, for example, at the Southern Baptist Convention, it's the largest Protestant body in America. It's going down.
Unambiguously.
Right. But now it's not a theological thing. Now for them, it's not like, well, this must also be a reflection on our theology. It's just move the goalpost and keep marching. And so I think that there is a holy judgment that is falling right now on the evangelical movement. And there are some good people who are still a part of it. I'm not, you're not. There are some good people who are still a part of it. There are the dissenters who are trying to save evangelicalism from itself. But I think that is a futile task. I don't think that evangelicalism will vanish from the face of the earth. The model is too attractive. People want certainty. They like rules.
I used to. That used to be a comfort.
It's a big thing for a lot of people. And so I think the model is to some degree too attractive. And so it won't disappear, but it will. It's going to do two things. One, by the nature of the way it's set up, it will fracture because there's no hierarchy. It is a brand of Christianity that is uniquely capitalistic, consumeristic, and individualistic.
That's right.
Very individualistic, all the rise of non-denominationalism, right? And it's a very American way of being. It's why evangelicalisms in other Western countries like the UK are nothing now, right? It's very American. And so I do think it has some staying power, but it's in the midst of an identity crisis. It doesn't know what it is. It's in the midst of a fracturing. And I think they have an image problem that in the world of social media, in a consumeristic world of brands, their brand could not be more toxic than it is. And I don't see any way that can be renovated, at least not in our lifetimes.
I agree with you. I don't think there's, I think it's beyond the moment where repair or reform is possible. That it's past. That's in the rearview mirror. So it will be what it's going to be, probably. My guess too is that it will continue to, I don't know, this word is so loaded. I can't find another one all of a sudden, but become a little bit more radicalized. Like more intense, more doubled down, not finding any bridges or, any connective tissue anywhere else. It'll be so siloed, which is, again, appealing to some. That's appealing. The silo effect of being a Christian in this world, it has some staying power in our culture anyway.
And modern even American evangelicalism is predicated on the existence of an enemy to fight.
That's right.
People, and that keeps people coming to church.
Sure.
So it's very attractive when there's this, it's the need to be against, right?
Yes.
And people actually revel in that. That's the selling point. There was an article that was written during the Trump era that, based on a study, the nastiest parts of Trump actually had the highest polling numbers of evangelicals.
I remember.
They loved that he was nasty. They loved that he was mean. They loved that he would make fun of people and call people names. That's what they do.
That's right. That's right. That was so disorienting. I remember when all that data was coming out, and it just I kept scrolling. I'm like, it's getting worse. It's just getting worse. It's just so demoralizing. This is the church that raised us. And I think I will just remain, while I can understand the analytics, I can on its face understand the human tendencies that have caught this lightning in a bottle in this sort of marriage of a party and faith. I think I will remain flabbergasted my whole life at how it's played out. I just flabbergasted, shocked and disappointed and sad. I mean, really just sad. The way it has sort of escalated in the last 5 years, it's just, in some ways, things I never thought I'd see or hear. I'm still like sitting over here going, well, it's just, and so I think it's interesting to hear you talk about the dissenters from the inside. You probably are a little bit more connected still to that community by virtue of your family, by virtue of your work, to know that. I don't know that anymore. I'm so far removed from that subculture. Do you feel like those dissenters are getting like chewed up for dinner? Like, do we need to send help? Like, do they need to blink twice if they like need us to come get them?
Well, what is happening is that the institutions that they have built and propped up are now falling in on them.
Yes.
So, the weapons have been sort of turned against them, and that which a person sows, they will also reap. And I don't think any intervention is needed necessarily, but they're being destroyed, because the real division is between, if you look at sort of the sociology of it, is between what you would call evangelical, what has been called by a sociologist named Michael Lindsay, the evangelical populists and the evangelical elites. Most of the resistance to the kind of Trumpist move is from scattered elites, people who like subscribe to Christianity Today and they graduated from seminary.
Yeah.
The regular folks who show up and cast ballots are pretty much in lockstep on this. So it's an untenable position for these leaders, because, you become a king without a country, or a queen without a country, so to speak. You're leading, but nobody's following. And I think that is the moment that a lot of these people are entering into. People like Russell Moore.
Yeah, I was just thinking about him.
Get out of his nomination. People, there are lots of people like this. We don't have to name them all, but there are lots of people like this. And we have a lot of friends too, I think, good people that we love, who are evangelicals, who have also had to kind of wiggle their way out of it. And they feel called to stay. And I don't wish a pox on their house. I just am finding God in other places these days.
I'd love to hear that about you, about what does your faith look like these days? How are you finding God? What feels true to you? Like, what lasted? What stuck? What were you able to say, this is of man, this isn't of God, and walk from? And how do you feel like you live out your faith right now, having come so far in a decade?
I have the benefit of going to school and having studied this.
Yeah.
And so, growing up, or even when you encounter a lot of these evangelical leaders, they'll argue their position. And it's so they're people can be so skilled at weaponizing the text, the scripture. And that doesn't work with me because I go, oh yeah, that's like actually the minority of the 14 interpretations of that chapter in Mark. So like,
they bring a knife to a gunfight with you, right? Like not today, Clarence. Not today.
Thank you. So for me, it is not. I'm less interested now in just turning back the arguments of a community. I'm not really connected to evangelicalism.
Totally.
I'm still, I lived in an Episcopal seminary.
That's right.
You can feel hundreds of years of prayers that have been prayed here by good people.
That's
people
lovely.
Who joined the civil rights movement, and
that's right.
People who were marching after the Stonewall riots, and people who did it because they loved Jesus and not in spite of that fact. And so the thing that gives me life, my next book, which I'm working on, is about sort of trauma-informed approaches to the Christian scriptures, to Christian practices. And what I am finding is that, there's an image in the Bible that in the last days that God will transform swords into plowshares.
Yeah.
I feel like that is my spirituality now. That all of these tools, practices, stories that for me had such sharp edges and that wounded me so deeply. It's not using, to quote Audre Lorde, it's not using the master's tools to defeat the master. It's allowing these tools to transform into the good gifts that they are. And I am more in love with the Bible than I have ever been. I just don't read it anything like I used to.
Sure.
But it is for me a living word with all of this ancient archetypal truths about what it means to survive life on planet Earth. And so I think that's something even in my family with my dad that challenges them, is that I may not have the right answers, but you cannot deny that I am walking this thing out, that I am living this sort of Jesus-informed faith. And so how do you reconcile that? Because this is somebody who's supposed to be evil and dark,
that's right,
and left out, and yet they're believably Christian.
That's right.
And I think that challenges, it's that life on life experience that happens in families when someone turns out different than you thought they would be, where that category, there's no room for that category in your life. And now it just is. That challenges the whole system. It's why the number one reason that someone changes their views on homosexuality or same-sex marriage is how they answer the question, do you have someone do you have a close family member or friend who is gay?
Yeah.
Because relationship changes us. And I think that's the way that theology grows. So for me, I'm still rooted in faith. It's just totally different than it used to be.
I'm telling you what, those Episcopalians, man, like they are the greatest. I love that that's been a lovely home for you, and that it's just a place of such deeply rooted faithfulness. And like you live there, that's in your walls. It's the grass that you walk on. It's profoundly sacred to me that you get to live in such a place where so many faithful people have walked before you, so many generations. And I love this gift for you, and I hope it lasts forever. So, Jonathan, thank you for your candor today and for being so willing to talk about such tender things and with such frankness, because this is so true and vulnerable in your life. And in addition, so many of the things you talked about are common. Like this is what a lot of people are walking through with their parents and in their churches and in their own hearts and in their own sexual identity. And so anytime I think we're able to put some like love and life and voice and experience around these lonely places, it's powerful. And your story matters, and people will be moved by it and inspired by it and encouraged by it. And so again, that's not something you and I'll probably ever get to know it to its fullest, what these kind of conversations mean to real people. But thank you for having it. And thank you for being willing to kind of share out of your own hurt and your own story. It's not going to be without fruit. I just know it. I know it for sure. Can you just tell everybody really quickly? Now, number one, you answered my question at the beginning. Do you want to stand by your answer? Do you have anything else to say? Let's say you had to pick a plan B on what's saving your life right now.
All right. I'll tell you.
What's your second thing?
I'll tell you. And as my computer is almost dying, so I'm going to just scoot over here and charge it. I'll tell you something that is also saving my life right now. I started about 3 or 4 years ago. I started spiritual direction, which is it's a very specific thing. I meet with a Jesuit priest, Father Jim Martin, and we try to meet every month. And it is such a sweet thing to sit with someone to just ask you how God's showing up in your life. And then to remind you that they're keeping like track of it. And so they're able to say like, yeah, God is showing up in your life as gratitude and generosity. And, teaching me something that was not a part of my previous faith tradition, which is trusting my experience. I was not taught to trust my experience. I was taught to be skeptical of it. Of course. So trusting that you're experiencing God in these spaces and that you can trace those experiences and you begin to develop a more acute sense of what is and isn't God in your life. That I will say spiritual direction for me has been a game changer. And I have wept and wept and wept in some of those meetings because I grew up with a God who was angry and temperamental. And that's important. He was not someone that I could trust. He was not someone that I really felt friendly toward. I was afraid of him. And to have that God concept that was such a sword be pounded into a plowshare that is doing good work in my heart, it's been a gift. And that is also saving my life right now.
That's such a great answer. So, okay. Everybody, where to find you. When's your new book coming out, by the way? Are you writing it right this second?
I'm writing it right this second. I think I was just corresponding with my publisher yesterday. I think it will be out in January of 2024.
Okay. Yeah.
So I've got to get it in by the end of this year. It also could come out late next year. We'll see. But people can follow me. I do tweet on rare occasion, and I love Instagram. I'm that guy. So I'm on Instagram. You people can look me up there or go to my website, jonathanmerritt.com.
Perfect. Thanks for being on today. I'm happy to see you. I'm happy to see you doing so well and flourishing and thriving and just really kind of being the most you I've ever known you to be in your own life. And it's wonderful to watch. And so whatever it cost and took to get here, it's wonderful to see, Jonathan. And I'm proud of you and I'm happy for you. And I think your leadership matters. And so, I come your way all the time and I bully my way into Chelsea because it's just so darn cute. So next time I'm up there, let's get together.
Well, thank you so much, friend. The pleasure has been all mine.
All right, you guys, thanks for listening. Just a reminder about this episode or any episode. We love to hear your listener voicemails. So if you go to jenhatmaker.com under the podcast tab, you'll see a button that just says send voicemail, and you can say anything you want to us. You can talk about this episode. You can say something you learned or heard. You can share your story as it relates to this episode or any episode. And Amy and I round those up, and we have guest listener episodes exclusively. And so thank you for leaving those messages for us. We love to hear them. We listen to all of them. And you may end up on the show. Thanks for being here today, you guys. We hope you loved this encore episode. We sure did. And we'll see you next week.